And because of that continuity, this is a part of Australia where Indigenous peoples were granted land rights several decades ago, but they did not have, and that gave them de facto control over the freshwater zones, but they did not have control over the sea. And because of this integration, this sense of ownership that flows from land to sea, that was a very important point for the Indigenous peoples of Australia. Where the majority of the time at this water forum we do talk about freshwater resources, but it is very important to also think about the 70% of the surface of the planet that is saltwater. And in pursuing that struggle, they were very fortunately successful, at least in securing some rights to the intertidal zone in 2008, a case that has some very important legal precedents both in Australia and overseas. So the lack of control over one aspect of water, in this case it was the salt water, was seen to affect the whole of Yolngu life because of this sense of integration. And this struggle for rights in the sea is in effect part of an ongoing struggle against the kind of compartmentalisations that are imposed from outside. Compartmentalisations between land and sea, between saltwater and freshwater, between people in the country and so on. Many times I've heard conversations between Yolngu people and non-Indigenous people, often managers or bureaucrats from the government, where there will be, if you like, a sense of frustration from the non-Indigenous side that people keep appearing not to engage with the issues. In fact, they're engaging with them, they're just refusing to engage in the kind of compartmentalisations that non-Indigenous peoples tend to operate with. The other thing about that struggle was it wasn't just a struggle for recognition, it was a struggle out of the recognition that resources in the saltwater environment were being used unsustainably by commercial fishermen and so on. So the sea rights case is both a claim for recognition, but also a claim for sustainability, an attempt by a local community to regain control over assets, over valuable parts of their environment that they feel are being misused. And I'd also like to move on in the last part of my talk to the awareness of some new challenges and new changes. One of those, which I won't be speaking about today, but which will be the subject of some talks by Joe Ross and I believe Nolan Hunter tomorrow, relates to the degree to which Australia as an environment is getting drier in the south and wetter in the north, and the kinds of pressures for water diversions that's going to create in the years to come. That also obviously is a very important issue for the Indigenous peoples of Northern Australia. Now those challenges for water diversions and for water issues generally, which will be discussed in the session tomorrow, come from, of course, the issue that we now know is central in the decades to come, climate change. And there are people from this environment who have already, of course, they're highly sensitive to the local conditions, have noticed changes in their world and have understood those changes to be part of wider phenomena. Here's an elder from Blue Mud Bay, Lukur Maruli, and another comment from a Yolngu person from the region, noting that the plants are flowering early, that salt water is moving into freshwater, and so on, that the world has changed. However, in relation to Indigenous knowledge, I'd also like to show you this slide, which again may not be that visible from the back of the room. It's a shell midden from a floodplain in northeastern Arnhem Land. And in the communities in which I work, there was also an archaeological project going on. And during that project, the archaeologists engaged with conversations and worked with the local Indigenous communities about what they were finding, about how the shell middens reflected the fact that sea levels were different thousands of years ago. And the communities found that, of course, very, very interesting because it was a record of their past, but it was also an indication of environmental change, but an indication of environmental change that had adapted successfully too. And so the point that I then wanted to make from that was that there is also awareness amongst Indigenous Australians that they have been in Australia for a very long time, that they have adapted to a wide range of changes in the past, and that in many ways that provides a source of confidence about the changes that might come in the future. we very often and importantly need to discuss the kinds of vulnerabilities that exist in the world in relation to climate change. But I also think it's equally important to recognise the strength that local communities and local knowledges can potentially give in addressing those issues. So, to conclude, there are a wide diversity of Indigenous peoples in Australia, and I was really only speaking about one small part of that story. There will be some more talks tomorrow that hopefully will introduce you to more of that. There are struggles for rights, for recognition, but also for sustainability, and that those struggles come out of, if you like, a resistance to the kind of compartmentalisations that tend to be part and parcel of some of the discourses that governments engage in. That global warming is presenting new challenges to people, but that there are also, that Indigenous knowledges are also dynamic, evolving, adjusting to new situations, learning new knowledges, and engaging with stories of the past in new ways. And on that basis, that people are not just victims of change, but recognise that changes are occurring, are capable of adapting and actively working for their own futures. So I'd just like to conclude by acknowledging the Yolngu people with whom I worked for this particular presentation, the UNESCO IHP program who've been supportive, and also the institutions there that assisted with the research. So thank you.
Thank you, Marcus.